what's going on, guys? This is Skyler Holt from Barbell Union, and this is going to be my first YouTube video, and today we're going to be talking about hypertrophy training for powerlifters. Now, powerlifting training is viewed as just kind of going heavy all the time, singles, doubles, triples, and pushing our limits on the competition lifts, as that closely relates and resembles to what we do in a competition setting. But there's many underlying qualities of fitness that correlate to our competition lift strength going up over time. And one of those that's very important is muscle hypertrophy, or just the size of our muscles. Now, research shows that a larger cross-sectional area for a muscle has the potential for more force production for that given muscle, meaning that more and larger available fibers have the potential to produce more force to pull on our bones to create stronger contractions. Now, powerlifting is a long game, and we need to pay attention to what our floor or our base looks like relative to our ceiling. And the best way that I can describe this is the floor-ceiling analogy. Now, our ceiling is simply put the competition lifts and the strength that we have on them, just doing the skill of squat, bench, and deadlift. Now, our floor, obviously underneath the ceiling, is all the underpinning general qualities of fitness that contribute long-term to our ceiling SBD work going up over time. That includes, what is your technique? Do you have good technique? Our work capacity, how much you can recover, injury history, things like that. But of course, the point of this video is also muscle hypertrophy and the size of our muscles. Now, there's a short tether rope that attaches the two that allows for the ceiling to move independent of the floor. So you can just do a ton of specific skill work and your ceiling will go up without your floor really going up. But because that tether rope is there, if your floor is extremely low, in the long run, your ceiling isn't going to be able to go up too much. So basically what I mean by this is long term, you can't have terrible technique. You got to work on that. You got to be able to improve your work capacity long term. You need to know how to move your body in space, just understanding general movement patterns. And then of course, you guessed it for this video, you have to just be a bigger, more jacked individual to maximize your long-term potential for powerlifting. Now, in powerlifting, we use the coefficient formula DOTS to measure our strength relative to our body weight. And it's very common for people early on in their career to restrict themselves to a certain weight class to maximize their DOTS. Now, while your DOTS may be a little bit higher by restricting your body weight to be a little bit lower in the short term, long term, it's not going to really grow too much. And we actually see the opposite, where when people go up a weight class or multiple weight classes, their DOTS score actually goes up over time after a small dip in the short term. And this is likely due to just having more available energy because you're going to be eating in a surplus and you can fuel your training sessions more efficiently. But looking at the bigger picture, it's also likely due to having more muscle mass and fat-free mass on your frame to contribute to force production, like we talked about in the earlier sections. And thus, getting bigger, of course, the right way, is going to lead to you being a stronger individual and maximize your powerlifting potential. Now, traditional ways of increasing muscle size are using hypertrophy blocks in tandem with strength or peaking blocks in a traditional block periodization format, where we're really focusing our efforts on getting as big as possible, tons of hypertrophy work with minimal to no actual skill work like we would have in a strength or peaking block. And there's a couple issues that arise while doing this approach. Now, the first issue that arises is that muscle hypertrophy is actually a very, very slow process that occurs, and you're likely not building a ton of actual tissue in a 4 to 8 week hypertrophy phase. However, you might lose out on a ton of skill and feel a lot weaker on the competition lifts by entirely removing them, or really just de-emphasizing the amount of skill work that you're doing. And thus, the trade-off there is very minimal. In fact, it might actually be a net negative. Now, the next issue that arises is that hypertrophy is actually always occurring. It's not just an on-off switch depending on if you're doing a hypertrophy block or a strength block. So throwing your main lifts to the wolves for a few months at a time just to get a fractional increase in muscle size doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Now, the third issue that arises is that the main lifts aren't really efficient tools at actually driving specific tissue growth. Now, this is for various reasons that include balance and other tissues being involved. They're very highly fatigable movements that involve spinal fatigue, coordination demands, and whatnot. And thus, we shouldn't really be using the competition lifts to drive muscle growth. We should more so leave those to skill development and actually practicing the comp lifts while using our accessory work to drive specific tissue growth, as they will be much more efficient tools to get the job done. Now, the main argument for not doing a concurrent approach where you're blending multiple qualities of fitness at the same time in your training plan is that, well, if you do a hypertrophy block or a hypertrophy phase, you can gain more hypertrophy doing this, and when you do a strength phase, you can gain more specific strength doing this type of phase, versus if you blend them, you're losing a little bit from each, and you're kind of sacrificing the gains you could get from each phase, which is true. However, the amount you're trading off is very, very minimal. If you want some raw numbers that are fairly arbitrary, you're likely looking at 5 to 15 pounds off your top end for the competition lifts if you push your accessories really, really hard. And that's not really that much in the short/long term, because if you go into a peaking phase and you taper and you start to focus on the competition lifts a little bit more, you turn down the hypertrophy work a smidge, you'll drop off that fatigue and you can actually see what's been cooking under the hood, and it's likely actually going to lead to greater long-term growth, because if we go back to that floor-ceiling analogy, the floor is going to be really, really high, and that ceiling, your comp work, when you get into a peaking phase, is going to have so much more room to grow and really kind of show itself, versus just not pushing our accessories hard at all, not really doing a lot of hypertrophy work, and attempting to stay peaked all the time year round. And then of course, looking at a hypertrophy phase, you're maybe missing out on like 5 to 10% the amount of muscle growth that you're getting. But of course, like we mentioned in the previous sections, you're going to maintain your strength and your skill very, very well, and let both of these qualities slow burn, slow cook throughout the entire year, versus just totally throwing them into the wolves and not focusing on them for very long periods of time. And then you're actually probably leading to a net negative on both of them by trying to have these very dedicated phases for them for parts of the year where you just totally de-emphasize them for that specific period of time. In sum, hypertrophy training and skill-specific training are both very important qualities of fitness that you should likely have in your program year-round. So to me, it makes the most sense to use a concurrent approach where we're blending both qualities of fitness in our program year-round with subtle shifts depending on where you're at in an off-season setting or a meet prep setting. Now that we know hypertrophy is very important for powerlifting, what are some actual programming considerations that we need to take into account to actually maximize our progress here? While there are many important variables that need to be taken into account when we're trying to maximize our hypertrophy in our training program, we need to have a requisite amount of intensity per set to ensure that we're accumulating sufficient amounts of mechanical tension. Now, mechanical tension refers to the pulling and squishing sensation that occurs on our muscles as we start to approach failure for a set. Now, think about when you do a max set of 10 on bicep curls. Now, your body is smart and recognizes the first couple reps are going to be pretty easy, and thus it's not going to recruit every single available fiber into your bicep to lift the given weight. Otherwise, you would just smack yourself in the face with a dumbbell. Now, as you get further and further and deeper into the set, your body is going to recognize that you're starting to have some intraset fatigue build up, and it's going to start to recruit more and larger available fibers in the bicep to help finish that set and get you to the end. And then at some point in that set, what we'll call about 5 reps from failure, is when every single fiber in your bicep has now been recruited to try to help you lift that weight. And then at this point of the set, each continuing rep, the rep speed is going to slow down despite you maximally contracting your bicep to lift the weight. When this starts to occur, this is when mechanical tension and that squishing and pulling sensation is being placed on our bicep, which then kickstarts that hypertrophy, or that process for muscle hypertrophy to occur. And again, there are many, many important variables that need to be taken into account when focusing on hypertrophy, but if this is not there, it'll all be for naught. Now, in simple terms, what does this mean? It simply means that your sets need to be hard, hence the phrase, push your accessories. We need to be pushing our sets hard enough so that the last few reps of the sets are actually slowing down despite us straining and trying to move the weight as quickly and forcefully as we can. And at all costs, we should be avoiding what we call fluff, easy sets that don't contribute to you getting bigger and stronger, but will contribute to you having a longer recovery time between sessions. Now, once we have proximity to failure taken into account, we then need to take a look at our weekly volume per muscle group that we're trying to grow. Now, it's important that we're taking this into account with the competition lifts rather than as totally separate volume amounts. As while we mentioned in previous sections, the competition lifts aren't the most efficient tools for muscle growth, they're still placing strain and fatigue on certain joints and muscle groups. So even though a low bar, wide stance, competition style squat isn't going to be just biasing the quads, it's still fatiguing the quads. And we can't just have 20 to 30 additional sets of quads per week. We need to take into account the amount of quad work that we're already getting in with our competition squat. So for this reason, I like to recommend starting small with 3 to 10 additional sets per week, as this tends to be enough to actually elicit growth without being too much or overboard, while we're also factoring in fatigue management with the competition lifts. So if you're doing 8 sets of squat per week, that might look like 3 to 5 additional sets of quads per week, spread out across 2 to 3 different exercises. You start from there, you monitor your recovery, and then you go from there. Now, once we have our weekly volume set and we know that all of our sets are actually difficult and challenging, we then need to pay attention to how we're progressing our accessories and tracking progression. Now, most people will say you just need to do your accessories and that's enough, but I wouldn't even say that that's the bare minimum, because we need to be actually progressing them and paying attention to long-term progression on our accessories, just like we pay attention to them on our competition lifts. Now, like we discussed earlier, muscle growth is a very slow process to occur, and it's difficult to see if it's happening in real time. So my advice is to pay attention to all of your accessory work and see if that is progressing over time or if it's not. Now, if you're trying to grow your triceps and your tricep extension is going up, your JM presses are going up, your skull crushers, your close grip, your dips, and your technique is staying the same, that's probably a good sign that your triceps at the very least are getting stronger, but they're also probably getting bigger as well. Now, circling back to something that I just said, as long as your technique is the same, that will be a good indication that you're progressing well. We need to have a standardized execution for all of our accessory work to ensure that our progression is not artificial. Because we can't see muscle growth in real time, we need to make sure that we are accurately tracking our accessory work and not artificially inflating our numbers by changing our technique and our execution constantly as the weight starts to go up. Let's say you're trying to grow your pecs and you're picking a dumbbell bench press and you're going to run that for 4 blocks straight. And at the beginning of the first block, you have picture perfect technique. You're having the dumbbells touch your chest at the bottom, 3 seconds on the way down, flat back. You're having your elbows tight to your side and you're leaving a couple reps in the tank, and maybe you're using the 70-pound dumbbells. Now, by the end of that macro cycle, by the end of block 4, now you're using like the 150s, right? Way, way heavier, but you've totally changed your technique. Now you're cutting range of motion, your elbows don't even pass your torso, you're flaring your arms out, you're arching your back, your butt's off the bench, you're not using a tempo, you're kind of using some momentum, and you're doing way less reps, and there's way less left in the tank. Now, obviously, you're using more weight, so the thought is, oh, well, I got stronger, I must have gotten bigger as well. But because we totally changed our technique and execution to make it easier for you to lift more weight, it's very difficult to tell if you actually got bigger or stronger at all. You likely got a little bit stronger, maybe fractional amounts, but not nearly as much as you could have if you stayed consistent with the execution that you set at the beginning of the macro cycle. Now, the biggest thing to consider here is that I'm not saying that one technique is right and one is wrong. The issue is the technique changed as you went and scaled loads up across the macro cycle. So the solution to this is not having perfect technique or sloppy technique. The answer is pick a technique, pick an execution that you can progress on without experiencing pain and discomfort. And it's going to be easier for you to actually track and keep it consistent as the weights go up, and keep that the exact same. And that's going to make it very easy to tell that if you saw loading improvements on that accessory, it was likely because you at least got stronger, but you also probably got bigger as well. Now, you might also notice that you're not making as much progress in your accessories as you were before. And that's okay, because even if it's, something like 10 to 20 pounds from block 1 to block 4, that's a very reasonable amount of progress, and it's ensuring that you're at least staying honest with your execution, and that increase in strength or increase in loading is likely correlated to muscle growth rather than your ego getting in the way and just having you throw heaps of weight on the bar but change the exercise entirely. You might also notice that you're not gaining anything on your accessories. Now, that's not the worst thing in the world. Of course, we want to progress our accessories, but it helps us troubleshoot to at least know we're not making progress, so we can troubleshoot our volume amounts, our frequency, our intensity per set, that maybe we got to swap exercises out, versus we're just telling our ego, oh, I'm getting so much bigger and stronger, but in reality, we're just artificially inflating our numbers just for the sake of it. Now, as a closing thought, we can optimize as much as we want in our hypertrophy training and our powerlifting programming to speed up our rate of gains. However, one of the most important parts of this entire process, and ironically it's at the end of this video, is actually our nutrition. We need to fuel our body to recover from all the training that we're doing to actually grow our muscles and make progress with our hypertrophy training. Now, training is the fun part where we get to go to the gym, turn the music up, lift heavy, and it's engaging and it's fun and exciting. So it's actually easier to just do the training, but when you have to go home and you have to eat food and you have to, prep and eat pretty clean stuff, it's not as fun, it's boring, and it tends to get pushed off to the side, but it's so crucial to get the most out of your training process, not just with powerlifting or hypertrophy, but just any type of fitness endeavor. Your nutrition is absolutely critical to nail so that you get the most out of what you're trying to do in the gym. Now, the first place to start, we have to understand basic energy demands, and the law of thermodynamics states that if you want to gain weight, you want to put on weight, you need to ingest more than you're expending, aka you need to be in a caloric surplus. So the best way that I tend to recommend this is you don't need to do the calculator stuff and try to figure out exactly what it is. Just get a diet app. Get MyFitnessPal, it's free. You can get Carbon Diet, MacroFactor is great. There's all these different diet apps that allow you to just put in the information. They do all the work for you, and it's like $5 or free, MyFitnessPal, like I said. And that's going to give you a good estimate off the cuff to figure out how much you need to actually eat to gain or lose or maintain your weight. And it'll adjust it for you over time and kind of take the guesswork out of it. Now, the next thing to pay attention to is actually protein intake. So we need to ensure that we're eating enough protein per day, per week, consistently to allow for adequate amounts of muscle protein synthesis to occur. I tend to recommend 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight a day. You might benefit from more, but just protein is such a high cost macronutrient that it's best to start with there. That's probably going to be enough, and if it's not, you're not recovering as well, you can increase it a little bit, but that's probably a safe bet. Now, the next thing to look at is your carbohydrate and fat intake, and based on research, we can see that if calories and protein are equated, the carb and fat distribution can be pretty flexible depending on whatever your preferences are. My recommendation is to bias a little bit more towards carbohydrates, especially if you're pushing your hypertrophy training really hard, you're doing very high amounts of training volume, because it'll allow you to have more energy in the gym and also help you recover a little bit more efficiently. Now, of course, the biggest issue typically isn't not knowing what to eat or how much and the macronutrients. The issue is actually adhering to the plan that you laid out when you kind of set up your nutrition plan. And my biggest 2 pieces of advice to help you stay consistent with your nutrition when you're trying to maximize your powerlifting performance is actually learn how to cook. You would be surprised how many people don't know how to cook and their food tastes like crap. And that's why people don't want to eat well, because they associate healthy eating with bland, crappy, gross food, and they don't want to eat that. They want to eat something tasty that's more, hyper palatable foods. And the best way that you can actually remedy this is just learn how to cook, learn how to season your foods, learn how to put certain meals together rather than just a smorgasbord of random stuff. And it's going to be so much easier for you to stay adherent to your nutrition plan, because you're actually going to look forward to eating your meals rather than feel dread and just, this is going to taste so nasty and I don't want to eat that. Now, my second piece of advice is actually give yourself some leeway. My biggest thing that I see with my clients is that they will have an all or nothing mindset where they're 100% on their nutrition. They maybe fall off for a day or two and now they're back to just totally throwing their nutrition to the wolves. And my biggest piece of advice that's allowed me to stay as consistent as I have for the last several years is adopt an 85-15 rule, where 85% of the food that you're going to intake is pretty good, pretty clean, on-plan stuff, and then 15% of it is maybe going to be a little bit off-plan. It's reminding you that you're going to have days that are 100%, you don't indulge in that 15, but if you do want to indulge, you can let go of the reins a little bit, but then it's right back on track, and you're not just swinging between 0% compliance, 100% compliance, because being 70, 85%, 100% of the time is going to be way better than being 100% on plan 50% of the time and then just totally falling off the rails the rest of the time. I know I did a little weird math equation there, but you kind of get what I'm saying. Give yourself some leeway, be flexible, and think of this as a long-term investment rather than yo-yo dieting and just trying to speed up the process as fast as possible. So that's all I got for today. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully more videos are going to be coming soon.